This topic just brings out the worst in people. So when I say body politics, what comes to mind first? Maybe bodily autonomy, sexual liberation. Honestly, those are like the main ones, if I'm being honest, and I think of those too whenever I think of this topic. Now, what do you think of when I say body hair politics? How do you feel? I'll do you one better. If you were to ask a family member or friend or whoever it is how they feel about body hair politics, how do you think that they would respond? I have found personally that usually people will conjure up this image of an angry, hairy, of course, filthy, usually not conventionally attractive, feminist, just raging about body hair. Because that's just what feminists do. Talk about shit that doesn't matter. Here I have a couple of examples of just the funniest memes ever. I mean, really, these people are so good. Of women, not even feminists per se, just being portrayed as these angry, hostile people solely for growing out body hair. Maybe some people might even say that they don't think anything of it, or they would claim that it is so mundane of a subject that it's not worth being talked about, that it isn't political. But isn't it? I mean, isn't everything political? That's what I'm here to talk about. As you could have probably guessed, body hair. So, hair has always carried a lot of power with it, and it still does today. And it really is a testament to one of the beauties of humankind, and that's just the sheer diversity amongst billions of people with something like hair or physical appearance in general. Unfortunately, if something holds power or significance, then somebody else is not going to be happy about it. Hair policing is nothing new. White colonists in the continental US, for example, would often cut the hair of indigenous peoples to sever any connections they had with their culture or their ancestry. The same thing happened with black people. I think it's the first step in subjugation when it came to slavery, and that was shaving their heads completely. Just like the indigenous communities here, it was about taking any kind of relation to their culture away and therefore taking their humanity away. You know, erasing somebody's traditions or cultural practices is a really effective way of erasing their humanity. Now, you're probably wondering how that relates to body hair, as I haven't mentioned it yet in any of these examples. Well, according to, I'm going to butcher this last name, Nadine Ajaka, Darwin's evolutionary theory transformed body hair into a question of competitive selection, so much so that hairiness was deeply pathologized. Rooted in traditions of comparative racial anatomy, evolutionary thought solidified hair's associations with primitive ancestry and atavistic return to earlier, less developed forms, Herzig writes. I just wanted to add that you could technically say that this stigma against body hair has been happening at different times and all throughout humankind's history. Different cultures oftentimes went through different phases of what body hair was acceptable, whether or not it was acceptable at all, which parts to shave, hair removal types, just different beauty standards. And that's not to say that we should disregard these cultures' practices, as body hair removal has literally happened all over the world throughout history. So there's a lot of diversity there. But for this video in particular, I wanted to focus on the war on body hair, which I would argue and other historians would argue, as they did in the excerpt I just showed you, started in somewhat 19th century colonial times, let's say. And again, I'm also just focusing on the US with this subject. So kind of beyond the roots of the war on body hair, it's really interesting and honestly depressing to see how all of that stigma has both evolved and just bled into the modern day. In an interview with Breanne Fahs, who is a professor of gender studies at ASU, as well as author of many, her and I were discussing the implications of that shame today and the public perspective as well as reaction to body hair existing or growing out your hair.
I had a group of students who kind of joked in a class, but way back, maybe like 2009, somewhere around there. they joked in a class about how we were talking theoretically about body hair and like, what would it be like to have body hair and all this. And they said, well, why don't we like all grow out our body hair for extra credit? We can write about it. And I thought at first was like, oh, haha, how funny. But then I thought, why not? Like, this is actually kind of an interesting idea. So then they were like, yeah, no, we're serious. We want to do it. So it started as this weird like experiment way back where they all together collectively in this class decided that they wanted to do this and grow out their body hair and then they wrote these like response papers and logs about it. And they discovered that it was a lot different than they expected. Some of them thought it would be very easy and mellow, and it actually ended up being incredibly provocative and hard. They also found that lots of people had lots of things to say about their bodies that they did not expect. So, it wasn't just that their romantic partners had feelings about them having body hair, but it was also their parents, their siblings, their friend groups, but even like, strangers at the gym or their coworkers or even their bosses had lots of things to say about body hair. So everyone seemed to want to weigh in on this. So that really surprised me. I guess I had expected more in the immediate family environments that people maybe would hear things about their hair, but you don't expect, like, if you work as a restaurant server, for your like manager to be weighing in on whether you grow your armpit hair. So it did alarm me how many negative experiences women had just doing something that should be very mundane and simple, right? This is like reversible. It's kind of benign. Like, no one really should care, of course, about this, but people have these extreme reactions.
If you thought that the reactions that Breanne was describing in her social experiment that she had assigned to her students were strange, then you can just imagine how much worse it was for a lot of women of color.
There's a lot of history about race and body hair, but in the immediate experiment, with the way that students reacted, there was definitely discrepancies on whose body hair is more visible, right? So women with darker body hair, more visible body hair, seem to face more stigma, and also had a lot more management of their bodies in general to try to avoid stigma. And so I think, there was certainly in people's reaction papers and responses, a lot of the women of color were talking about how, the blonde, light-skinned, light-haired women just like did not face as much stigma in like a material sense, but also these narratives of like respectability, social class, and all of this like had different implications for women of color than the white women as well, right? So kind of like the consequences of growing body hair, let's say in a family where there's a lot of narratives of like, you need to be respectable, quote unquote, and your body needs to be complying, were much steeper, right, than like for women who grew up in households where that wasn't a constant narrative. And those narratives, of course, emerge for very real material reasons, right?
The message is clear. Growing out your body hair comes with shame, and nobody will let you hear the end of it. And what's even more frustrating is that shaving doesn't actually come with any hygienic benefits. The Mayo Clinic actually has a list of risks associated with hair removal, whether it's shaving or waxing, and it specifically focuses on pubic hair, which makes sense because, of course, that would be the most dangerous area to remove hair from, especially with the methods that we use nowadays. But you'll see that some of these can also apply to other types of body hair as well. Another thing to consider is the pink tax, which, just by saying that, I hope it sparked some kind of feelings about it. And it's just when companies will price feminine hygiene a lot higher than men's hygiene. Women's shaving products are actually priced almost 13% higher than men's shaving products, at least in the US. So although we can't really avoid the price gap in terms of menstrual products, we can avoid unnecessary spending when it comes to hair removal because, again, there's no benefits to it. If there is, that'd be news to me.
There's no actual hygiene implications for real. I mean, and if anything, hair is protective, right? Like for years, they used to shave women's pubic hair before they did cesarean sections on pregnant women who are delivering babies. And then they realized like, oh no, wait, pubic hair is actually very helpful for preventing infections. And when we shave it all off, we are opening up women to have more staph infections and more infections of their bodies, like in a very vulnerable moment. So now gynecological practices have shifted from like every single woman had to be like, had their pubic hair shaved off to like, we do not do that anymore because it's so dangerous.
So how exactly does age play into all of this? Well, typically hairlessness is associated with youth. That's one of the reasons why it's in such high demand from other men or people, as well as why it's regarded as so important by many women and just people who shave. According to a research paper by Azevedo, I may be pronouncing that wrong, a hairless body is a direct representation of a pre-puberty body, and pornography uses this fact to associate childish with sexy. By having constant access to this type of content, men grow to expect a hairless body as an indicator of youth and femininity. They form the wrong expectation of how the female body should look, which directly affects women as they report being influenced or pressured by sexual partners to remove body hair. I think that this reveals the meat that we're really trying to get at here, which is that this is all about the politics of desirability. For women, being sexually sought after or just acceptable has been taught to be prioritized over all else. Although we've come a long way, in other ways, we really haven't. Oftentimes, we think that we're, woke enough, participating enough in the movement, or we could possibly think, at least me personally at one point, that we might have escaped patriarchy. But just when you think you have, something in the corner of your eye catches you, something like body hair, which, as I've been saying throughout the entirety of this video, is always considered really mundane, which it is, but everybody has an opinion on it, so it is worth discussing. Like many things, hair removal stems from fear. So to end this video, I just wanted to make it clear that to anyone that shaves, whether or not you're a cisgendered woman or you identify as a woman at all, I don't blame you. I know that you are the victim here of unfair standards. I, of course, just as everybody else, still feel the pressure of it all coming down on me most of the time. But I want to encourage you to maybe try not shaving your body hair. Maybe even just for like a week. Although it will most likely be uncomfortable and people might have something to say about it. They probably will, at least mentally. I think it has been a really eye-opening experience for me personally, just to realize just how powerful social norms are, and I didn't actually realize that until after I broke one. Especially being as young as I am, I do kind of fear the day that people won't see me as desirable as I guess I would be if I both shaved and stayed this young forever. But that in and of itself is the little man, like the little devil on my shoulder talking to me. I want to work hard, even if it takes me my entire life, to rid myself of shame over things like this. To just rid myself of shame overall. Maybe one day you'll want to participate in that as well. All of the links to the sources that I use to compile research and information on this video will be down in the description. Do you have your own personal anecdotes about body hair? Well, I will let you think on that. See you next time.